You know, when you pick up a modern Bible, chances are it's translated from what scholars say are the oldest and therefore best manuscripts we have. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the very foundation of those Bibles, these two super famous ancient manuscripts, are actually deeply flawed? We're about to jump into one of the biggest, and I mean biggest, debates in biblical history.
Wow, I mean, the two most corrupt manuscripts in existence. That is an absolutely explosive claim, right? And it's coming from a really respected 19th century scholar, John Bergen. He's aiming that shot directly at two of the most revered artifacts in all of Christianity. So this isn't just some dusty old academic squabble. Nope. This is a direct challenge to the very text that millions upon millions of people read every single day. Okay, so to really get what's going on here, we first have to understand this sort of quiet battle that's been happening for centuries. It's a fight between two very different families of New Testament manuscripts. So you've got two main teams in this fight. On one side, you have what's called the Textus Receptus, also known as the majority text. Think of this as the basis for Bibles like the King James Version. It's called the majority text because it represents thousands of manuscripts that all pretty much agree with each other. Then on the other side, you have the critical text. This is what most modern Bibles, like the NIV or the ESV, are based on. But here's the thing. It comes from a much smaller group of manuscripts, mainly from a family called the Alexandrian texts. Now, the big idea in modern scholarship is simple. Older is better. The thinking goes that the older a manuscript is, the closer it is to the original, and the Alexandrian texts are definitely older. And really, the critical text leans heavily on two main superstar manuscripts, Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus. I mean, these are the rock stars of the ancient Bible world. They were found back in the 19th century, and they're centuries older than almost everything else. So the mainstream view is, hey, their age makes them the most reliable witnesses we have, period. But there's a really vocal group of critics who have a powerful counterargument. They say their age doesn't matter because the texts themselves are a mess. So let's do it. Let's dig into the case against them.
All right, first up in our investigation, where did these things even come from? For the critics, the story of how they were found is the first huge red flag. Let's call it Exhibit A, their dubious origins.
Okay, the story for Codex Sinaiticus is just wild. It's 1844, and this scholar, Constantine von Tischendorf, is visiting a monastery at Mount Sinai, and he finds pages of this incredibly ancient manuscript. Get this, literally in a wastebasket, just sitting there, waiting to be used as kindling for a fire. So Tischendorf, he's freaking out, right? He sees this as a priceless, forgotten treasure. But critics, like our friend John Bergen, they immediately ask a very different and pretty logical question. Hold on, why would the monks, the actual guardians of this thing, throwing it in the trash? Their theory? The monks knew it was a bad copy, that it was full of errors, so they were getting rid of it. One man's treasure might have just been another man's trash for a reason.
And this whole thing points to a bigger worry about where they came from. See, both manuscripts are from the Alexandrian tradition in Egypt. Critics argue that this area was kind of a hotbed for some, let's say, unorthodox philosophical ideas at the time. The fear is that the scribes there weren't just being faithful copyists. They might have been actively correcting the text to make it fit better with their own unique beliefs.
Okay, let's move on to Exhibit B, the internal chaos. We're talking about the actual physical state of the manuscripts. I mean, if these are really the best, most reliable copies, you'd think they'd be pretty consistent, right? Well, according to the critics, they're anything but. Get this. In just the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus disagree with each other more than 3,000 times. Just let that sink in for a second. These are supposed to be the two star witnesses, and they can't even get their own stories straight. And that is exactly why John Bergen gave them that killer nickname, the two false witnesses. I mean, his logic was pretty powerful. If these two can't even agree with each other, he said, why on earth should we trust them over the thousands of other manuscripts that do all agree? Codex Sinaiticus in particular is just chaotic. It has thousands of corrections. Scholars have found the handwriting of maybe up to 10 different editors who came in and made changes over hundreds of years. I mean, there are so many additions, deletions, and scribbles that Bergon famously said the manuscript is at war with itself. It's like a document that can't make up its mind.
All right, on to Exhibit C. And honestly, this might be the most famous and frankly shocking piece of evidence against these manuscripts. We're talking about all the stuff that's just missing.
So here is the bottom line. The critical text, the one based on Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, is about 7% shorter than the Textus Receptus. Now, 7% might not sound like a lot, but believe me, it adds up. We're talking about thousands of missing words, and in some cases, entire famous stories.
And we're not talking about small little grammatical tweaks here. No. Some of the most well-known parts of the Gospels are just gone. You know the last 12 verses of Mark, the part that describes Jesus appearing after the resurrection? Missing. That famous story of the woman caught in adultery from the Gospel of John? Also gone. And the crazy part is, these passages are in the vast, overwhelming majority of all the other manuscripts we have. But not in these two. But wait, here's the real kicker. In Codex Vaticanus, right where Mark's Gospel just stops, the scribe left an entire column totally blank. It's the only blank column like that in the entire manuscript. It's almost as if the scribe knew that the ending was supposed to be there, knew the passage existed, but for some reason decided to leave it out. It's just this strange, haunting, empty space. So, what's the final verdict from the critics? When you put it all together, the sketchy origins, the internal chaos, all the missing pieces, what does it all add up to?
Well, this quote right here, "Antiquity is not synonymous with purity," really just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures the core of the argument. Yeah, the main defense for Sinaiticus and Vaticanus is that they're old. But critics say, so what? Just because something is old doesn't automatically make it accurate. I mean, an old copy full of mistakes is still, well, it's still an old copy full of mistakes.
And look, this case against them has been built up over centuries. You have John Bergen arguing that these aren't some perfect originals, but are actually just the mangled remains of a bad copy. Then you have scholars like D.A. White, who cataloged thousands of specific changes that he believed watered down key Christian beliefs. And then Jack Mormon, who focused on the thousands and thousands of words and phrases that are just plain missing. And all of this leads to their final, really powerful conclusion. Think about it. Why did these two manuscripts survive in such great condition for 1,500 years, while other copies were literally used until they fell apart? The critics' answer is stunningly simple: because nobody used them. The early church, they argue, knew they were corrupt and just put them on a shelf. So they weren't preserved because they were revered, they survived because they were abandoned.
So even though the modern scholarly world has pretty much embraced these ancient texts, the case against them raises some really deep questions, Questions about how we decide what's authoritative and what's true. It forces us to face this fundamental problem and leaves us with one final, big question. If just being old isn't the ultimate measure of reliability, then what is?